Welcome, and in this lesson, we're going to talk about input and output redirection. Now, in terms of input and output redirection, we're going to learn a few commands that allows us to view contents of a file by sending it to standard output. We're also going to learn how to redirect our standard error after learning about standard error and standard output to different files and also append information. So let's go ahead and get started. First, let's introduce ourselves to the cat command. I'm going to navigate into the etc directory and I'm going to do a cat on the MOTD file. Now, if you are wondering, I'm just SSH'd in from my desktop to the regular linuxacademy.com lab server. You're welcome to use VNC to follow along in the GUI, or you can just SSH from a regular terminal. So now that we did the cat MOTD, let's do a cat issue. So what's happening here is we're taking the contents of this MOTD file and then the issue file and displaying those contents inside of our standard output. Now, standard output here is what we see on our screen that's being outputted. It's not an error, it's regular output we see from issuing a command. This is successful, so it's considered standard output. So the other side of that is cat is called concatenate. When used with just one option with it, you'll notice that it outputs the contents of that file, the entire amount of contents. If I wanted to, I could do a cat on our MOTD file and then pass it another parameter of the issue file. And it's going to combine both the contents of our etc issue file and the contents of our etc MOTD file inside of one single standard output. So let's say I wanted to take this output, this combined output, and redirect it into a file. I want to use input-output redirection. So in order to do this, I'm just going to very simply do my cat MOTD issue, and I'm going to redirect it using the greater than sign to a specific file. In our case, I'm going to put it inside of our home user directory called cat-motd.txt. So what we've just done there is, if we navigate into our home user directory, is we've created a new file called motd-issue. If we open this file using something like vi or motd, or in this case, we could use less motd, I can hit my tab command for command completion. And we'll see that we have our contents of our MOTD file as well as our issue file. And this is combined together to create one file. So what I did was I took a command to view the contents of a file inside of our standard output. Then I took that standard output and I redirected it. Think of it like a funnel. You're tossing the standard output down the funnel and funneling it into our home user cat-mot directory. Well, here's a trick to that. What happens when we use just a single greater than sign? A single greater than sign means redirect the standard output to the file, overriding the file if it already exists. So for example, if I were to do an echo hello, that's just going to echo it to our standard output. If I then redirect it to our cat-motd.txt file, and then we take a look at our cat-motd.txt file, you'll notice that the output of our MOTD file and our issue file is no longer there. In fact, it is just our hello. What happened was when we use a single greater than sign, and I often refer to this as a redirect sign because we're redirecting standard output to a location. When we use just a single redirect, it's going to overwrite the file if it exists. If it does not exist, it will create the file. Well, that presents somewhat of a dilemma. Let's say I just want to add text or append it to a file. How might I do that? Well, I can just do an echo, and we'll do world, and we'll do a double redirect inside of the cat-mod.txt. What this is saying is if the cat-motd.txt, and I said dot a second ago, so keep in mind it's cat-motd.txt, if it exists, then don't overwrite it, append to it. So let's take a look at that cat-motd.txt. Well, there we go. We've appended contents to that. So let's do our cat etc issue and combine that, because cat is a concatenate command. It combines multiple files, multiple parameters that we're passing it, multiple files into one standard output. So we'll cat the etc issue and the etc motd file and redirect it twice. So we're going to append it to our cat-motd.txt. And then let's take a look at our motd.txt. You'll notice that our hello and world are still there, and then it's appended the output to it for us as well. You'll notice it did the issue first because that's how, or the order that we issued it in our command. We first looked at our issue and then our MOTD. So again, the single cat just outputs the entire contents of a file. If we use cat together with multiple files, it's going to concatenate or add all of the output of all of the contents of the files that we use into one standard output. So we have cat. I can even cat the MOTD file. I can cat the Etsy issue file, the Etsy OS release file. And that's going to all go to our standard output. And then I can redirect that into a file, or I can append it into a file using this. Now, oftentimes, standard input and output's important not just for redirecting information to a file. So, for example, MySQL uses this in order to dump the contents into a new database. So often we'll see, all right, well, let's export the contents of a MySQL database by using a command called MySQL dump. And then we type in the table name, and then we redirect it into backup.sql. We're backing this up into a SQL text file. It's dumping that information. Well, MySQL also accepts input redirection. So if I were to say table name and then use the less than symbol and then my backup.sql file, what would be happening is our MySQL command is accepting input from our backup.sql file. So whatever was backed up in there before, it's accepting that as input. Think of it like this, funneling all of the information inside of our backup.sql file, funnel it through our little funnel and into our table name, our MySQL command. And that's what it's doing. So we're able to actually use this for input redirection as well. That's why it's called input-output redirection. So let me introduce you to standard error. Standard error is when there is an error reported on your terminal window. So I'm just going to arbitrarily type a command. This is an error. This error says bash command not found. This is considered standard error. So what would happen if I tried to issue an arbitrary command inside of bad command.txt? What happens when I try to echo this output in there? I'm not even echoing it. I'm just issuing a command inside of bad command.txt. Well, nothing's going to happen. If we take a look at our bad command.txt, it's empty. It did create the file because our redirect symbol here, our greater than sign, says create the file if it doesn't exist. But it didn't input any information. Well, that's because this represents standard output, right? It represents standard output. What we see here, this is considered standard error. So how would we redirect this error? Let's say we have a bash script. This bash script issues an error. How would we redirect the error to a log file? So it's very simple. We could just issue our arbitrary command, and then what represents error is the to character. So to, and then our redirect symbol, or our greater than sign, and then bad command.txt. Now this works the same way. We have a single redirect symbol, and what it's saying is, if bad command exists, remove it and override it with this new information. So now if I take a look at our bad command.txt, you'll notice that our error that was issued whenever bad command did not work is in that file. You'll also notice that, well, when we issue our command, it didn't come to our standard error. We didn't see it on our screen. Well, that's because we redirected that into bad command.txt. So we're actually saying, okay, don't show me this on my terminal window. Instead, redirect it to somewhere else. Now, a lot of times we could do something called /dev/null. Let's say we're issuing a command, and that command has a lot of arbitrary commands associated with it. It's just going to keep outputting and outputting information. Well, we don't want it on side of our terminal window because when the command executes, it'll completely clutter up our terminal window. Can even slow things down when we're writing items to standard output. So instead what I could do is I could issue the command and then I could redirect it, or depending on if it's standard error, I could redirect it to dev/null. /dev/null is kind of a kernel location for basically empty information. It's cyberspace. It's space that doesn't exist. It's where information goes to die. Nothing's there. Nothing will ever be there. You redirect it there. The information's instantly lost. That's all dev null is. So if I were to issue this bad command, and I were to do my double redirect, you'll notice that I don't have standard error on my screen because I've redirected it into badcommand.txt. If I look at my badcommand.txt, it's appended that information because we used the double redirect. Now, what we've learned here is how to use standard error or use standard output and redirect it. But what happens, I'm just going to create an arbitrary file here. I'm going to call this command. What happens when we issue just an arbitrary command and then another command inside of a directory? We know this command is going to be successful, so the contents of our etc directory will be listed in standard output. We know this command will not be successful, so it's going to be issued in standard error. If I were to save and exit on this, and I'm just going to give it execute permissions real quick, and I were to execute my command here, you'll see that we have both standard error currently going to our terminal, and then we have our standard output. If I were to redirect this inside of output.out, you'll notice that we still have our standard error because all we did was redirect our standard output to output.out. But if I were to do 2, it's going to show us our standard output, but it's not going to show us our error that we received. You'll notice the error is not below there. So how can I redirect both of them? Well, in fact, that's really simple. All I have to do is use the AND symbol. So it'll be AND, then our output redirection. And so that's going to append it. Again, our single output is going to append both standard output and standard error. And then our double output is going to append it. So our single overwrites it, our double appends it. So if we fill out our output.out file and do a less on our output.out, we can use the D command or even the space bar command to browse down and view all of those contents because it's just continuously appended. Now let's say that I wanted to send both my standard error and standard output to the same place. In other words, let's say I want to redirect my standard error to standard out. So I want it to go to standard out. I could very simply just issue a command here, right? This is our bad command example. We have our 2 greater than, that represents our standard error. Then if we were to do and 1 as part of that, what it does is it redirects our standard error to standard output. Now, what is the benefit of that? Well, with standard output, I can then use this pipe command. Now, this pipe command, what this does, it allows us to chain multiple commands together, taking the standard output of your previous command as input for your next command. So this right here is output. Now that we sent it to standard output, I can take that standard output and pipe it to another command. All I'm doing is I'm taking that standard output, piping it to another command, and that command might be, for example, grep. And I'm going to grep for command. And that's going to, well, find the command in my standard output. Now, if I clear my screen, kind of clean it up here, and I were to not use the redirect to standard output, well, it's not going to allow me to do it. It's actually going to error out. Because what the pipe character does is it allows us to accept standard output, not standard error. It allows us to accept standard output as input for another command, effectively allowing us to chain commands together. And let's take out the standard error on that now that I've shown you how to redirect standard error to standard output and why we would want to do that. Let's go ahead and demonstrate something else. We're going to demonstrate this pipe command. I'm going to ls the etc directory. I'm going to take the standard output of that. I'm going to pipe it through the grep command, and I'm going to pipe it for motd. What that's going to do is it's going to take the output of everything inside of the etc directory, and it's only going to filter through motd. I took the output, and then I filtered it through grep. I can also filter it through different things. I can take all of the output and I can filter it through the less command. Basically, I'm going to load all of the contents of that into my less browser. My less browser allows us to view contents of files and output. In order to close the less program, I just hit Q. So that's what the pipe command allows us to do. Now, we can pipe it as many times as we want. We can filter down and filter down. We can take standard output of command and pipe it and continuously pipe it, command after command after command. That's kind of one of the great benefits of Linux. We can do all of those things, and we can combine a single command based off of output of other commands. So now that we've learned that commands can accept input through the less than sign, and we learned how to redirect output through the greater than sign, let's go ahead and show one more example. So I can do an ls-fy. ls-fy is not a command. The flags don't exist. They're invalid options. But let's say I wanted to pipe the contents of the ls command inside of my log.file. Well, all right, there's no standard output, but there is standard error. What I want to do is I also want to catch any standard output that might come with this, because one of these might actually exist and it still might execute. So how can I also redirect the standard output and also send the standard error? So again, we could go back to our example and we can redirect it using the 2 and 1. Now we could have also used the and send to both send standard error and standard output, but we could grep that by sending that information. But we could grab that information by also using our 2 redirect and 1 to send standard output to standard error. And if we take a look at our log.file, it's all in there for us. So let's go ahead and take a look at a few other output commands here. First, I'm going to head into my log file just because I like going into my log directory. We have cd/var/log. What I can do is I can use the head command. I could type head messages to view basically my system log. Now what the head command does is it sends to standard output the first 10 lines. I could pass it another flag or option, same thing, that says I want the first 50 lines of messages. It's going to send the first 50 lines of messages to standard output. I could also use a command called less to view that standard output. I could say less messages. And it's going to start us at our top. It's going to start us at our oldest, and then we browse down, it's going to get to our most recent. If we clear our screen, I can also use a tail command. So if I do tail messages, I can view the last 10 messages of a file, and this is going to be inside of our standard output. I could use this to tail messages and redirect this to anything inside of our file. For example, home user last 10 lines.txt. We can redirect that output into that specific location. Now, I can also pass it the -f flag. What the -f flag does is it says continue appending that information as it's written to the system. So we can watch log files live as they write to the system. You can see here we're not back at the command prompt because if there was a line to be edited here, then we could watch it append to it live. I could also go ahead and do a tail-n50 messages and view the last 50 entries of our message log file. This is the opposite of head for tail. So that concludes it for this lesson. Go ahead and complete this lesson and move on.